The following are true scary stories found on the subreddit Let's Not Meet. I'll have a link in the description below if you would like to read along with me. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch all of my future content. Let's begin. This story is about 3 years old, from a time when I was living in a somewhat sketchy area of a major US city. I was 23 at the time, and I'm very small. I absolutely adored my studio apartment. It was located on the 4th floor of an old red brick building that was built in 1912, complete with rickety fire escape and an elevator with layers of old paint that had peeled off over the years, exposing a patchwork time capsule of gaudy taste. The walls were thin, the carpet blue, tacky, and well worn. The doors were relatively new, and cheap. They may as well have been made of plywood. But it had that great city feel about it. Located in the most populous part of the city, tall buildings and Art Deco theaters surrounding it, illuminating nightfalls with freestanding neon signs and spotlight billboards. I felt free and alive. I lived there for 2 years. I had a few incidents in and around the building that should have been indicators that I needed to break my lease early. One of those including a neighbor exposing himself to me on our fire escape one night while I was smoking a cigarette. And even worse still, when I was beaten and mugged for my laptop only 1 block away. Like many of the building's residents, I had seen hard times before, and moving anywhere safe on my income seemed nearly impossible. I was barely getting by. So I convinced myself to wait it out and everything would be okay. Until it wasn't. Normally I'd take the train to go dancing on Friday nights. This was probably the only Friday night that I decided to stay in. My friend Homer was over watching a movie, and my other friend Justin was staying with me until he could find a room. Despite whatever random turn of events led to this night, I am very grateful that they were with me. I lived alone. My neighbors knew that fact because I knew most of my neighbors. They were mostly struggling actors and artists, a few immigrant families, and some elderly people. We all took care of each other, and none of them, aside from the creep who exposed himself to me, were cause for any concern. I should state before I continue with my story that the creep I just mentioned was not responsible for the following events. He couldn't have been, because he was shorter than me at 5'6" and barely spoke English. At around 10 p.m., I roll out some blankets and yoga mats for the guys to crash on. My bed wasn't much better, a foam mattress topper lying on the floor. It is worth mentioning here that because my place was so tiny, the bed could only face one direction without blocking the kitchen, the direction toward the door and hallway. It is also worth mentioning here that my apartment looked out onto the street, and any lights on or off are visible from the street below. At 10 p.m., we hit the lights and called it a night. As I lie in bed staring at the door, trying to fall asleep, something catches my eye. Remember I mentioned the fire escape right outside my apartment door? Tenants often walk to the fire escape, much to my landlord's disgust, to smoke cigarettes, weed, or drink beer. Because of its proximity to my doors and windows, I can hear the conversations on the fire escape. The usual suspects partying up there normally brought music with them. Tonight it was silent, all except for a pair of feet that kept walking back and forth in front of my door, their shadows exposed by the fluorescent hallway lights. Nobody is up there drinking tonight. Why is someone going back and forth in the hall? I felt a jab in my side. "Did you see that?" Homer whispered. "I wasn't going to say anything," Justin chimed in. They were both still awake. Then, to our collective horror, the feet stopped directly in front of my door. About 20 seconds later, a second pair joined them. The second man was huge. He must have been over 6 feet tall, because the shadow of his body eliminated the light around half of my door frame. I realized he was standing in front of the side that locks, Then more whispering, this time from the other side of the door. We couldn't make out any of it, except for one telling the other, "Shh." Then the knocking began. It was a light, almost friendly knock. The same type of knock I would use when visiting my friend's house to let them know that it was me at their door. Immediately I froze. None of my neighbors ever came to my door, only my landlord, and only during business hours. I wasn't expecting company, nor did I have the type of friends who would just show up unannounced. My building locked from the outside, and you need to be a resident to have a key to get in. My mind started racing. Do they know I'm home? I was usually gone at this time on the weekends. I thought of calling the police, and then remembered using my phone in a building where the walls were so thin that you could hear your neighbor's TV programs wasn't a great idea. Besides, how would they even get into the building? I'm sure as hell not opening that door for them. More knocking. Playful this time. Taunting. Homer and I sat there in fear as Justin walked to my kitchen and grabbed 3 knives. He came back and handed Homer and I a knife. My knife was maybe 4 inches long and used for cutting bread. I never felt as trapped and as helpless as I did at that moment. It was because of this experience alone that I later learned to use firearms. We heard whispers on the other side of the door, and then suddenly, "I know you're in there," the heavy voice hissed. "Ashley, I know you were home." My heart fell out my ass when I realized he knew my name. Then we heard the scratching, and my lock jiggles. Fuck. Immediately, Homer half leaps, half stumbles to the door, and with the stealth of a ninja, he locks the deadbolt and chain, silently and quickly. Now they are trying to take the fucking handle off my door. And then it stopped. I looked at the boys. "Nobody goes near the fucking door," I remember saying. I have no idea what I did following that moment. I grew up around domestic violence, and I have a habit of blacking out certain memories or events that disturb me as a defense mechanism. Perhaps it is because of this that I fell asleep that night. When I woke up the next morning, I finally opened my door. A screw was missing from my door handle. The other, thankfully, was stripped beyond removal. On the floor was a pile of cigarette butts and ashes. They must have waited outside my door, second-guessing me being home and waiting until the clubs ended. Waiting for me, in front of my own door. I later asked the teenage boys playing outside around the building what they had seen. These were troubled kids who had got shaken down weekly by the police for stealing bikes, tagging dumpsters, that kind of thing. But they were harmless and quite friendly to me. What they told me is that 2 or 3 large black males were staring at my window, and then started jumping or lifting each other up to the first level and onto the fire escape. That is how they got in. To this day, I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. My landlord was too cheap to ever install security cameras. I still get chills down my spine when I think about how they could have possibly known my name, though. There is a photo of this building included in the story. The top right row of windows are all one apartment, the one that I used to inhabit. It was a small space, but long, if that makes sense. You can see the fire escape, etc. I used to work at a Target in Melbourne back in 2003 when I was 18. I am not what you call an average female. I am 6'2", lots of tattoos, and not hard to miss if you were to come to the checkout line. A quick layout of the store. It has 3 levels, including a basement level where the DVDs were and where I used to work a few shifts. The majority of the time, though, I would spend working at the checkouts. One shift, an older man with gray hair and glasses comes to the checkout. First thing I notice is that he doesn't have any products to buy. He says, "Wow, You remind me so much of my granddaughter." Harmless, right? I smiled and joked about how she must have been a great girl. He then began to ask me about my family and where I grew up, etc. Being from Adelaide, I knew I probably didn't know this man. It was weird, but not unsettling. Thankfully, there were customers behind him, and I politely said that I needed to get back to work. He smiled and said he might bring in some photos one day to show me. I smiled back, and he left. Didn't think about the encounter at all, until about 2 weeks later, when he came back. I wasn't worried, but just annoyed, being 18 and not interested. He showed me photos of his granddaughter and family, and there was a slight resemblance. Again, being a store, I had a lot of work to do and excused myself to get back to work. He stood in the store staring at me for a long while, which I noticed, and it was making me really uncomfortable. My biggest mistake was not letting my supervisor know at the time. I didn't tell anyone, except my friend who asked who he was. Fast forward 3 weeks later, and yep, you guessed it, there he was. But this time, he looked sad. He managed to get me aside as I was walking to my break. The photos he showed me were of a funeral. First of all, who the fuck takes photos at a funeral? Anyway, he said that his daughter and granddaughter were murdered by his son-in-law and missed them very much. I kind of felt sorry for him, but then he said something that sent shivers up my spine. "I know that you're my granddaughter. I'm so happy that I found you again." What the actual fuck? My face went red, as it does when I get nervous. "I don't think so, sir. I have missed you so much." He began to cry and grabbed my arm. He tried to hug me, but luckily one of my tall managers walked by and I pulled away. "Hey Grant, you still need help with that cage?" Grant looked confused, but he must have seen my unease, because he nodded. "Yeah, that'd be good." I looked back at the crying, gray old man and smiled nervously. We got in the elevator, and I escaped upstairs. I then told the manager what was happening, and they noticed how much this freaked me out. Thankfully, I wouldn't have to see this man for a few weeks because I was going on vacation. A friend did say that he saw him around, and he was looking for me. I came back to work, and not a week later I came up to the front registers to start my shift, and I saw him. Luckily, he didn't see me, so I stopped and headed back to the elevators. I found my manager and told him what was going on. He told me to go downstairs to the basement and stay there until he came and got me. I don't know what happened next, except for what I was told. Apparently, the man started yelling and saying that his granddaughter worked here, and then started yelling that he needed to see me. The security and my manager tried for about 10 minutes to get him out of the store. This time he brought a few things with him. He had the photos, female clothing, and a bracelet, which I can only assume were all from his granddaughter. He started screaming his granddaughter's name, and he had to be drug out of the store. From that day on, I spent most of my time in the basement, working the registers there. I left that job to move back to Adelaide soon after. I did kind of feel sorry for the man, having suffered such a loss. He was obviously not accepting their deaths. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch all of my future content. I'm also going to be releasing another video on my second channel today, Fear Your Maker. So if you aren't subscribed over there, make sure you go subscribe so you can catch that a little later on. I hope you all have a great weekend, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.